It was supposed to be a simple visit to the bank, a routine I had done 1,000 times. But when I walked into my parents' office afterward, expecting a warm greeting, I was met with their cold, cutting words, "Don't come back." They didn't know I had just donated $5 million to save their business. Before we continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I honestly love reading each one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, enjoy the story. I hadn't been back home in nearly 5 years, not since I left for the city to carve out a life on my own. It wasn't like I didn't love my parents, it was just complicated. We had always been close, but I wanted more than the small-town life they were so content with. I'd worked hard to distance myself, convinced I could make a name for myself without relying on anyone, least of all them. I stood outside the old family-owned bank, my parents' bank, its faded sign barely visible against the midday sun, the smell of freshly cut grass, the hum of distant traffic, the dust in the air, all of it was so familiar, it felt like the years had just melted away. "Just going to make a quick deposit, then go back home?" I muttered to myself. I didn't plan on staying long. I was here because my mother had sent me an urgent text this morning. "Come to the bank. We need to talk." Usually those words meant something minor, maybe a small issue with a transaction, or Dad forgetting to sign some paperwork. It wasn't out of the ordinary, but today felt different. I walked inside the building, the familiar jingling of the doorbell above my head greeting me. The air inside smelled of old paper, ink, and the distinct whiff of the leather chairs my parents had chosen years ago. Everything looked exactly as it had when I left. No surprises there. Dad was behind the counter, flipping through some forms, looking as worn out as ever. He hadn't aged well, gray hair, a few extra pounds, but still that same stern expression I remembered from my youth. I walked up to him, my heart skipping a beat. "Hey, Dad," I said softly. His eyes didn't immediately meet mine. Instead, he glanced up, gave a quick nod, and then returned to his paperwork. "No. Hello, how have you been? No, it's good to see you." Nothing. I stood there, the awkwardness pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. "I got your message," I added, trying to break the silence. "You wanted to talk?" Dad didn't look up. "Yeah, I'll get to that later." I frowned, confused. What was going on? Mom appeared from the back office, a frown on her face. She had always been the warmer one, the more emotional one. She was also the one who usually kept things running smoothly here, making sure Dad didn't get too wrapped up in the numbers. She seemed to notice the tension between us immediately. "You're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Is everything okay?" Her lips tightened, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her composed facade. She motioned for me to follow her into the back office. I followed her silently, my stomach tightening with unease. Once we were behind closed doors, she looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw it. The disappointment, the hurt. She tried to hide it, but it was there, plain as day. "Why didn't you come back when we needed you?" she asked, her voice trembling. I blinked, thrown off. "What do you mean? I've been busy, Mom, you know that." She shook her head. "No, it's more than that. You cut us off. You left us without a word, without even trying to help when things got rough." She paused, and her eyes darkened. "We've been struggling, and you didn't even bother to check in." My heart sank, the guilt hit me like a wave. I didn't know things were this bad," I stammered. Dad came in then, cutting the air with his sharp tone. "We didn't need your charity. We've made do without you." His words stung, and I recoiled, but something in me snapped. I wasn't offering charity, I was offering help. Help you desperately need. Mom's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and showed them the bank transfer confirmation. $5 million, I said, voice shaking with a mix of frustration and hurt. "I just transferred that to keep the business afloat, to save this bank." Silence hung between us, thick and heavy. Dad's face paled. "What? No, you didn't." "I did," I replied quietly. "I didn't want to watch you lose everything." Mom's eyes were wide with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell us? Why not before? Why wait until now?" I swallowed hard, biting back the anger that threatened to rise in me. Because Because you never gave me a reason to come back. You never asked me. You shut me out the moment I left." Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she turned away. "You shouldn't have done this. We didn't want you to rescue us. We didn't want you to pity us." "Don't come back," Dad said coldly, his voice hard. "You think you can throw money at us and make everything better? That's not how this works." I stared at them, stunned, before the reality hit me. They didn't want my help. They didn't even want me. I turned to leave, heart heavy. As I stepped back into the main area of the bank, I felt the weight of everything. The years of distance, the years of trying to prove myself, of trying to make my own way. I didn't have the answers to fix things with my parents, but that $5 million, that was my way of trying. And now they didn't even want it. The door slammed shut behind me as I stepped back into the main lobby. I could hear the low murmur of my parents' voices, muffled, too quiet to make out, but their words still stung, even if I couldn't hear them. The way they looked at me, as if I was some kind of stranger offering them charity. It wasn't how I envisioned this moment going at all. I stepped outside, the hot afternoon sun hitting my skin like a slap, and squinted into the horizon. I didn't know where I was going or what I was even supposed to feel, but I just needed to move, away, anywhere. The $5 million. It felt like a heavy weight pressing down on me now. I had made the transfer to fix things, to help. I had thought, deep down, that it would mend the rift, that it would bring us closer, but instead, it felt like I had poured gasoline onto a fire. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another message from Mom, maybe an apology or a plea to come back and fix things. Instead, it was a call from my attorney. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight with urgency, "we need to talk." I paused. "About what?" "About the business. There's been a complication," he continued, his words almost too fast for me to follow. "The money you donated, it's tied up in a legal matter. You're going to need to come to the office. We're facing a major issue with the transfer." I felt a rush of panic. "What are you talking about? Is it not going through? No," he interrupted. "It's not that. There's a legal hold on the funds. Someone's put in a claim against it." I stopped dead in my tracks. My thoughts scrambled. A claim? Who would do that? "I don't know, Olivia, but you need to get here. This could be bad." I hung up, heart racing. What did this mean? How could they have frozen the money? I thought I was doing the right thing, but now it seemed like everything was falling apart. I tried calling Mom, but she didn't answer. I tried Dad too, but the call went straight to voicemail. I couldn't even get through to them now, and that made everything worse. My parents, the people who had raised me, who had taught me everything I knew about hard work and sacrifice, they couldn't see the help I was offering. They just saw a betrayal. With no other options, I made my way to the attorney's office, my mind spinning. I arrived at his office about 30 minutes later, a glass and steel monstrosity in the heart of downtown. I took the elevator up to the 24th floor, my stomach a mess of knots. As soon as I entered the office, I could see the stress on my attorney's face. He was standing near the window, looking out at the skyline like he was trying to make sense of something. "Olivia," he greeted me, his voice tense. "We've got a problem, a big one." "What's going on?" I demanded, crossing the room. "Who's freezing the transfer?" He turned to face me, his brow furrowed. "It's not a who, Olivia. It's a what, and it's far more complicated than we thought." I raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean? I just wanted to help my parents. They need the money. Now." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to figure out the right way to tell me something I wouldn't like. "Here's the thing," he began. "The money you donated? It wasn't just a simple transfer. It was routed through several different accounts, some of them offshore. And when we tried to trace it, we found some irregularities. Someone in the system put a block on it." I froze. "What kind of irregularities?" He hesitated. "It looks like the money was funneled through a series of shell companies, and those companies are connected to some pretty shady characters, people you don't want to be involved with." I stared at him, trying to digest what he was saying. "Wait, you're telling me my donation is somehow linked to criminals?" "I can't confirm that yet," he said quickly, "but the situation isn't good. And if this doesn't get cleared up soon, it could be a huge legal headache. Not just for you, but for your parents, too." I sank into the chair trying to process this new twist. How could this happen? I just wanted to save them. I wanted to save everything. He stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. I know. And this situation is still salvageable, but we need to move fast. We're going to need to follow the money trail and find out who's behind this and why. My head was spinning. But they don't even want me involved. I tried to fix things and I stopped myself, realizing that now wasn't the time for a pity party. I had to keep my head in the game. If someone was playing dirty with my family's business, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Olivia, my attorney said, snapping me back to the present. This is bigger than you realize. You need to be careful who you trust. This isn't just a business issue. It's a personal one now. Whoever's involved in this could come after you next. I looked him in the eye. Then let's get to work. I'm not backing down now. I spent the next few hours with my attorney, going over every detail of the transfer, tracing the money as far as it would go. We hit dead ends, phone numbers that didn't match, email addresses that led to nowhere. It was like someone had covered their tracks perfectly, but the more I dug, the more it became clear. This wasn't just a random crime. It was targeted. And that's when I realized the truth. The only way I was going to find out who was behind this was to go straight to the source. But who was the source? The question gnawed at me, relentless and insistent. It wasn't just about saving my parents anymore. It was about taking down the people who thought they could use my family's struggles to their advantage. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been playing a long, patient game, and I was only just starting to realize the rules. It was more than just a money transfer gone wrong. This was personal. Someone, somewhere, had known exactly where to hit us. They had seen my parents' business as a weak spot, and, whether directly or indirectly, had decided to exploit it. I spent the next few days sifting through records, emails, and phone logs with my attorney. We started to unravel a pattern, a trail of shady deals linked to people I had never heard of. Shell corporations in foreign countries, fake invoices, accounts under false names. Every lead felt like a dead end, but I couldn't stop digging. The more I searched, the more it became clear. The people behind this weren't just criminals. They were experts. It felt like I was being watched, like every step I took brought me closer to something dangerous. And yet, I couldn't stop. The question of who had done this and why kept eating away at me. It was late one evening when my attorney called. I had just gotten home, the dim glow of my kitchen light casting long shadows over the counter as I looked through more papers. My phone buzzed on the table, the ringtone cutting through the silence. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight. "I found something big." I stood up, my heart skipping. What is it? Remember that offshore company I told you about? The one that seems to be linked to all this? Well, I traced it back to someone familiar. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Who? He paused. It's your father's old business partner, Robert Hale. I nearly dropped my phone. Robert Hale? I repeated, barely able to believe what I was hearing. But he left the business years ago. They had a falling out. I know, my attorney replied. But it looks like he never really left. He's been pulling strings from behind the scenes, and it gets worse. He's been funneling money out of your parents' business for years. The room seemed to spin for a moment. I pressed a hand to my forehead. No, that's impossible. Dad would have known. He would have never let that happen. Well, that's the question, isn't it? My attorney said. Was he in on it, or was he being played? I hung up the phone without another word, my mind racing. Robert Hale. I had known him as a kid. He was always around when Dad was working, a friend of the family, someone who seemed trustworthy. But this was a betrayal of the highest order. I needed answers, and the only place I could get them was from the man himself. The next morning, I drove to Robert's house, located on the outskirts of town. It was a sprawling, pristine estate, well-kept, far removed from the small bank I grew up in. I had always thought of Robert as a successful businessman, someone who had made it out of the small town and into the bigger world. But now, everything about him seemed like a lie. I parked my car near the gates and hesitated. What was I even going to say to him? Hey, I know you've been stealing from my parents for years. Care to explain? It didn't exactly sound like a warm conversation starter, but the more I stood there, the more I realized I had no choice. The truth was waiting inside that house, and I was going to find it. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. A few moments later, Robert appeared, his expression unreadable as he opened the door. "Olivia," he said, his tone just a bit too casual, "what brings you here?" I stared at him, my fists clenched at my sides. "I know what you've been doing," I said, voice low and steady. "I know you've been siphoning money from my parents' business. I know about the offshore accounts, the fake invoices. You've been pulling the strings for years, haven't you?" His eyes widened, but only for a split second. Then he let out a sharp laugh. "You've got quite the imagination, Olivia. What makes you think—" "Cut the crap," I interrupted, stepping forward. "I'm not here for excuses. I'm here for answers. You've been using my family's business for your own personal gain, and I want to know why." Robert's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "You don't know what you're talking about? You think I'd steal from your parents? They're like family to me?" "Then why are you involved with these companies?" I shot back. "Why did you move money around behind their backs? Tell me, Robert." There was a long silence as he stared at me, weighing his options. I could see the gears turning in his head, and for a moment, I wondered if he was going to deny everything. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I didn't want to hurt your parents, Olivia. I didn't want this to get ugly." He paused as if struggling with the words. "But when your father made that decision, when he refused to grow the business, it became clear that things weren't going to end well. The bank was on the brink of collapse." I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about? If the bank was struggling, why didn't you just talk to my parents?" He shook his head. "Your father's pride got in the way. He wouldn't listen to reason. So I did what needed to be done. I kept the business afloat in my own way by making strategic moves behind the scenes." I stared at him, feeling the full weight of what he was admitting. "You were taking advantage of their failure. You used their weakness against them." Robert didn't flinch. "I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. If I didn't step in, the business would have collapsed. You wouldn't have been able to help them with your $5 million. Your parents would have lost everything." I swallowed hard, trying to process this. "So all of this was a business decision to you? My parents' livelihood? Their future?" "Yes," he said bluntly. "And now it's too late for them. The money you donated, it won't save them. They're already too far gone." I stood frozen, the realization hitting me like a ton of bricks. Robert had been playing a game, but it wasn't just about money, it was about control. And now everything was coming to a head. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "It's not over yet. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make sure my parents don't lose everything, even if it means taking you down first." I turned on my heel and walked away, knowing this was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Robert's words echoed in my mind, bouncing off every corner of my brain. Too far gone. The idea that it was too late to save my parents' business felt like a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. But I couldn't accept that. Not after everything we'd been through. Not after the years of hard work my parents had put in. The bank wasn't just their livelihood. It was a part of who they were. And Robert Hale? He was a cancer in their business, and I wasn't going to let him win. The next morning, I met with my attorney again. I could already tell that the situation had gotten worse. My attorney's office was cold, sterile, like the calm before a storm. He barely looked up as I entered, his face lined with frustration. "Olivia," he said, finally meeting my eyes, "we need to talk about the money. The hold on the funds isn't just a glitch, it's deliberate. Someone has made sure that your donation can't be touched. And it's not just Robert Hale. Someone higher up is involved." My stomach sank. Who? Who could be higher up than Hale? This goes back to the bank, doesn't it? To the people who— "Yes," he interrupted. "It's bigger than we thought. It's tied to the higher-ups in the bank itself. I've been looking into it, and I'm starting to see patterns in the way the accounts were handled. It's not just your parents' business at risk. It's the entire community that could suffer if things go south." I ran my fingers through my hair. "So now what? Do we just give up? Just let them destroy everything?" "Olivia, I'm not saying that," he said, his voice growing more urgent. "But we have to be strategic. If we go public with this, it'll be a fight on every front. It's not just Robert Hale we're dealing with anymore. It's a whole system that's been built to protect these people. And they'll fight dirty. We need to be prepared." I stared at him, trying to focus through the thick fog of panic creeping in. "Then what do we do?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "We need to break the cycle. We need to make them pay, and we need to do it in a way that takes their power away without them realizing it." I wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his tone made me listen. He didn't seem like the type to talk in riddles, so there had to be something I was missing. I nodded slowly. "All right, let's do it. Let's break this thing wide open." The plan wasn't simple. It involved contacting people I never thought I'd have to deal with. Bank insiders, people who were too close to Robert and the system he'd built. We needed to expose the corruption, but I knew the risks. Every move we made had to be precise, every person we spoke to had to be trusted, and even then, the consequences were too great to predict. The days that followed felt like an endless loop of phone calls, meetings, and late nights. My attorney and I kept pushing forward, gathering information, hoping to find something that would bring the truth to light. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was in my car, heading to the office to meet with another contact, when my phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting it to be my attorney, but it wasn't. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated but answered anyway. "Olivia Hart," I said, trying to sound calm. "Olivia!" The voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "This is Dennis. I'm the one who's been working with Robert Hale." I froze. "Dennis," I repeated, my voice shaky. "What do you want?" "I have information you need," he continued, his words coming fast now. "But you need to listen carefully. Robert is making his move now. He's preparing to take everything your parents built, and he's going to blame you for it. He's got his people in place, and they're ready to push this to the breaking point." I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel. "What do you mean he's going to blame me? I'm not the one." "I know, but he's manipulating the story. He's going to make it look like you're the one who tried to destroy your family's business. He's already planted the evidence. It's all set up." I couldn't breathe for a moment, the panic rising in my chest. "What evidence? What are you talking about?" "He set you up for a fall," Dennis said. "You need to stop him before it's too late. You need to act fast." The call cut off, and for a moment I just sat there in shock. This was it. The moment I had been dreading had arrived. Robert Hale wasn't just trying to take control of the business. He was trying to destroy me in the process. I slammed the car into gear and sped off toward my attorney's office, the feeling of dread heavy in my gut. I burst into the office without knocking, my breath coming in sharp gasps. "We've got a problem," I said, barely able to get the words out. My attorney stood up immediately, his expression serious. "What's happened?" "I just got a call from someone on the inside," I said, pacing in front of his desk. "Robert's planning on pinning everything on me. He's setting me up for a huge fall, and he's already planted evidence to make it look like I'm the one who tried to destroy the business." My attorney didn't blink. "I figured he'd try something like this. We need to move quickly. We need to track down the evidence he's planted and get ahead of him before he can use it against you." "How do we do that?" I asked, my voice thick with frustration. "How do we prove I'm not the one who's been—" "We don't prove you're innocent," my attorney said. "We prove that Robert Hale is the mastermind. We turn the tables on him, and we make sure the world knows the truth before he can get a single word out against you." I felt a surge of determination flood my chest. "Let's do it. Let's take him down." The next few days were a blur of legal battles, high-stakes meetings, and careful maneuvering. We went straight to the sources who could expose Robert's actions, people who had been working with him for years, people who were just as willing to break the silence as I was willing to break free from his lies. We hit him where it hurt, exposing the manipulation, the schemes, and the webs of deceit he had spun. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fast, but every step we took was one closer to revealing the truth. And then, one night, I got the call that changed everything. Dennis had come through. He had given us the final piece of the puzzle, the proof we needed to take Robert down for good. It was over. Robert Hale's empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The days that followed felt like a slow burn. I could almost taste the victory on the horizon, but the closer we got, the more I realized that the game wasn't over. Robert Hale had never been the type to go down without a fight, and I knew the final battle would be far from clean. His empire was collapsing, but he still had connections, and those connections had power. If I wasn't careful, the truth we'd just uncovered could be buried by the very people I was trying to expose. I met with my attorney again, in a small, nondescript coffee shop away from prying eyes. It felt like every move we made was now being watched, so we had to be careful. The moment I sat down, he slid a file across the table. "This is it," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "This is everything we need to ensure Robert gets what's coming to him." I opened the file carefully, scanning the documents. Inside were copies of financial statements, emails, and transaction records that tied Robert Hale directly to the illegal offshore accounts. There were also witnesses, people who had worked with Robert over the years and were now ready to testify against him. It was the smoking gun we'd been looking for, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. "Are you sure this will hold up in court?" I asked, my voice tight with doubt. "Robert has a lot of influence, a lot of money behind him." "Olivia," my attorney said, his eyes serious, "we have more than enough to take him down, but we need to move quickly. He's going to try to make this disappear, and the longer we wait, the more time he has to cover his tracks." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was the moment. I had to commit to this fight no matter what it cost me. I had already lost so much. My family, my peace of mind, my trust in the people I thought I could rely on. But I was going to make sure Robert didn't get away with it, not after everything he'd done. "All right," I said, meeting my attorney's gaze, "let's take him down." We filed the documents, the witnesses came forward, and the press began to catch wind of the story. It spread like wildfire as the public learned about the corruption, the manipulation, and the shocking betrayal that had unfolded in their own backyard. Robert Hale's name was everywhere, linked to the downfall of my parents' business and the web of lies he had spun to keep it afloat. At first, it felt surreal. The more I saw his face plastered across the news, the more I realized how far-reaching his power had been. People I'd never met, strangers in my community, came to my side. They rallied behind my parents, offering their support, offering their resources. It felt like the world was finally waking up to the truth. But then, just as I thought we were finally going to get a fair hearing, Robert made his final move. I was sitting at home scrolling through the latest news reports on my phone when the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the time, past midnight. I cautiously approached the door, my hand hovering over the handle. I peered through the peephole and my stomach churned. There, standing in the darkness, was Robert Hale. I opened the door, my voice cold. "What do you want, Robert?" He looked different than I remembered. Gone was the confident, charming businessman I had once known. Now he looked like a man on the edge, desperate, angry, and defeated. His clothes were disheveled, and his face was gaunt, eyes wide with panic. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice shaking. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." I didn't step back, didn't let him in. "Explain what? How you've been stealing from my family for years? How you've been lying and manipulating everyone around you?" "Olivia, it's not like that," he said, his voice rising. "You don't understand. I was trying to save it, save your parents' business. They didn't know what they were doing. They couldn't see what was happening. You think they could have kept it running? You think they could have made the tough calls? I did what had to be done." I shook my head, disgust swirling in my stomach. "You were never trying to save anything. You were lining your own pockets while everyone else paid the price. You destroyed everything for your own gain." Robert stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached out. "Please, Olivia, this isn't what you think it is. I'm begging you. You have to stop. If you go through with this, if you take me down, you'll destroy everything. The bank, the business. It'll all come crashing down, and it'll be your fault." His words were like a slap in the face. "My fault? After everything you've done? You're unbelievable." He looked at me, his eyes wild with fear. "You think I'm the villain in this story? You think you're the hero? You don't know what you're up against, Olivia? If you think you're going to win, you're wrong. You're making a mistake." I took a step back, closing the door in his face before he could say anything else. The fear in his eyes had been genuine, but that didn't change anything. Robert Hale was a liar, a manipulator, a thief, but I wasn't going to let him win. The next few days were a blur of emotions: anger, fear, relief, and an overwhelming sense of finality. We were getting closer to the end of this nightmare. The pressure mounted as the media continued to cover the unfolding scandal, but I kept my focus on what mattered most: taking Robert Hale down for good. The trial was set for the following week, and I knew it would be the ultimate test. I had everything I needed to make my case, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just about my family's business anymore. This was about exposing the truth and holding someone accountable for destroying so many lives. The day of the trial arrived and the courtroom was packed. People from all walks of life had shown up to witness what would surely be a groundbreaking case. My parents sat beside me, their faces a mixture of pride and fear. They were finally seeing the truth, seeing the man who had nearly ruined everything they had worked for. As the trial began, I looked at Robert Hale one last time. He sat across from me, his face pale, his eyes tired. There was no smug confidence now, only desperation. And that was when I realized something: I had already won. The verdict came down 2 weeks later. Robert Hale was sentenced to years in prison for his role in the financial scandal. He lost everything: the power, the wealth, the reputation. And my family? We were finally free. As I stood in the courtroom, hearing the gavel fall, I knew that the journey had been long, painful, and hard. But I had done it. I had saved my parents' business. I had taken back control. And most importantly, I had made sure that the man who had betrayed us paid for his actions. Before the trial ended, I stood up and walked over to my parents, my heart swelling with pride. We had won, and no one could ever take that from us. The courtroom doors slammed behind us, but the weight of the moment lingered. Even though the gavel had fallen and Robert Hale was now just a name whispered in hushed tones around the city, the truth still hung in the air, heavy like smoke after a fire. I stood there, staring at my parents, trying to reconcile the reality of what had just happened. The business we'd saved, our livelihood, our legacy, was still intact. But so much had changed. Everything had been tested. And through it all, we had made it out on the other side. But what now? "I think it's time we go home," my dad said, his voice hoarse but steady. He placed his hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't just about the victory in court. It was about how far we'd come, how much we'd endured. My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes brimming with pride. "We did it, Olivia. You did it." I couldn't respond right away. The emotion was overwhelming: relief, exhaustion, and a strange kind of peace. But beneath it all, there was something else, something gnawing at me deep in the pit of my stomach. "I didn't do it alone," I said quietly, my voice almost a whisper. "You two were the ones who built this place. You taught me everything I know." They smiled, but it was bittersweet. I could see the toll the last few months had taken on them. They were still standing, still fighting, but they were different, hardened in a way I never thought I'd see. We left the courthouse together, our steps synchronized as we walked out into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, and for a moment, everything felt still, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for the final chapter to be written. The next few weeks were filled with the quiet aftermath of our victory. The business was secure, and my parents had regained their footing. Robert Hale was behind bars, his empire crumbling faster than I ever thought possible. The community rallied around us, offering their support, their gratitude. It was humbling to see how many people had been affected by Robert's schemes, people I didn't even know, who now turned to my parents for guidance, for leadership. But there was one person, one final piece of the puzzle, that I couldn't shake from my mind: Dennis. I hadn't heard from him since the trial. He had been the one to give us the final evidence, the key that unlocked everything. I didn't know where he had gone or what he was doing, but something told me that our paths hadn't truly crossed for the last time. One afternoon, nearly a month after the trial, I received a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." I hesitated for a moment, but I knew. I knew it was Dennis. There was no question. I had to meet him. I arranged to meet him at a small park near my parents' house. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with humidity. I walked across the grassy field, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp ground, and there he was, sitting on a bench, looking much the same as when I had last seen him. Tired, worn, but there was something different in his eyes now, something quieter. "Olivia," he said, standing as I approached. He didn't reach for a handshake, just stood there, almost like he was waiting for something. "Dennis," I said, my voice guarded. "You wanted to talk, so talk." He nodded, then motioned for me to sit beside him. "I know you've been through a lot, the trial, the business. It's been a whirlwind, but I think you should know something." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Dennis looked out at the empty park, his gaze distant, lost in thought. "You were right, about everything. I was just trying to survive, trying to protect myself. But the truth is, I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about what Robert was really doing, how far he was willing to go, but you saved everything. You saved your parents. You did what I couldn't." I stared at him, trying to read his expression. "So why help me? Why risk everything to bring Robert down?" Dennis exhaled slowly. "Because I couldn't live with myself anymore. I've been working for him for so long, watching him destroy everything in his path, and I didn't say a word. I thought if I kept my head down, I'd be fine. But after what happened with your family, after seeing how far he was willing to go, I realized I couldn't be a part of that anymore. So I took the risk. I gave you the evidence. I made sure you had the upper hand." I didn't know what to say. Dennis wasn't a hero. He had done wrong, and he knew it. But there was something in his voice, something in the way he spoke that made me believe he was genuinely trying to make amends. "Then what now?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked at me, his face unreadable. "I don't expect forgiveness, Olivia. I just needed you to know the truth. And I needed to make sure Robert didn't win." I nodded slowly. "Well, Robert didn't win. We did." Dennis smiled faintly. "Yeah, you did. You always were the smarter one." There was an awkward silence between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like the quiet that follows after something profound has been said. We didn't need to say much more. Dennis had helped us. He had played his part, and now it was over. I stood up to leave, and Dennis followed suit. "Take care of yourself, Olivia. You've done something I could never do, something I never thought possible. You've got your family, you've got your business, and you've got your future ahead of you." I turned to face him, the final piece of the puzzle slipping into place. "I'll take care of my family, Dennis, and I'll never forget what you did." With that, I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of the past few months finally starting to lift. I didn't need to know where Dennis went next. I didn't need to know his story any longer. I had my own story to finish. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of it. As I drove home that evening, the sun beginning to set behind the hills, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. How much I had learned, how much I had grown. I wasn't the same person I had been when this all started. I had faced fear, betrayal, loss, and ultimately, redemption. The bank, my parents, Robert Hale. All of it had led me here, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. And then, as I pulled into the driveway, I saw my parents standing on the porch, waiting for me. I got out of the car, and my father looked at me with that same steady, proud gaze. "You did good, Liv," he said, and my heart swelled. "You did real good." Before I could respond, my mother wrapped me in a tight hug, whispering, "We couldn't be prouder." I stood there, in the embrace of the people who had always been my foundation, and for the first time in months, I felt peace. This was the end of one chapter, but it was also the beginning of a new one. Before we finish, I want to hear from you. How did this story resonate with you? Do you have any thoughts on what you would have done in Olivia's shoes? Let me know in the comments. I always love hearing from you. And if you like the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Thank you for joining me on this journey.